phone. Oh. We might have to do that all over again. Today's subject hearing is docket number 0842, order for a hearing to discuss parking in the city of Boston. This matter was sponsored by Councilor Frank Baker and referred to the committee on June 8th. Please, if you have a cell phone, please silence your cell phone. At the end of, we will take public testimony. First, before I turn it over to Councilor Baker, I just want to commend you, Councilor Baker, for this order. This is a hearing that we probably should have had a long time ago. So I'm excited to be here with, as you see, with my colleagues, because this is an issue in all our neighborhood. So with that, to the sponsor, Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to make it clear that the purpose of this hearing is not a call for the creation of more parking structures and expansive parking lots. Rather, we are here to discuss parking in general in the city of Boston. That means reviewing current and long-term city parking programs and examining new and creative parking options for Boston drivers. This should include assessing existing municipal parking lots, specifically those located near businesses and shopping districts. The creation of small municipal parking lots would promote economic growth for shopping districts with very limited parking, like Upham's Corner and Lower Mills. This has been done successfully in many cities, including Somerville and Cambridge. This would give us an opportunity not only help support our local business, but also create new revenue for the city. It would also be worth reevaluating our resident parking program and explore the use of parking permits for businesses, their employees, home health care workers, and the like. I do understand the importance of promoting the use of alternative modes of transportation. I encourage the implementation of car and bike share programs across my district and its inclusion in all new developments. However, the scarcity of parking is increasingly becoming a larger issue. Overall, this is not about creating lots of parking. It's about supporting our local businesses and making life a little bit easier for Boston residents. Thank you, and I look forward to learning more about what our city is doing to handle current parking issues and future possibilities for alleviating parking woes.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. Councilor Linehan from South Boston, here to make a statement?
I'm fine, thank you.
Also, Councilor Flaherty is here with us. President Wu, here to make a statement?
Just wanted to thank Councilor Baker for introducing this and the chairman for making sure we have this conversation now. It's undeniable that every neighborhood we go to, parking comes up. But I just want to emphasize, as we're hearing from the administration, who I know share the council's commitment to creating more transit and transportation options across the board, access, and are thinking very thoughtfully about our choices, that we need to talk about parking not just in the context of whether someone can get to a store and find a place to leave their vehicle while they go inside, but really as a choice that the city is making on how to allocate very scarce public resources in terms of the physical space of our streets, what amount of that space is going to on-street parking versus other types of infrastructure such as cycle tracks or pedestrian space, as well as what we're doing with the potential revenue that is or is not being collected now and where that is being directed. So those are the things that I'm looking forward to hearing more about. And again, thank you.
And we're joined by Councilor Anissa Sabi George, who has a lot of questions. And Councilor Mark Siomo, here to make a statement from Brighton.
The attention it deserves.
Thank you. Thank you. With us, we have Commissioner Gina Fandak from the Boston Transportation Department, Chief of Streets, Chris Osgood, and Director of Development and Review for the BPDA, first time saying that in public, Jonathan Greeley. Welcome. So I don't know who wants to go first, Chief. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sounds good. Chairman, thank you so much again. Councilor Baker, thank you for for introducing this. It's a great subject for us to be talking about this afternoon. As you noted, I'm joined by both Jonathan and Gina Fiandaca, who leads the Boston Transportation Department, who really oversees the City of Boston's parking policy. That policy has three top priorities. In our downtown and Main Street districts, our objective is to support all businesses. In our residential areas, our objective is to create easy places to live. And across all of our streets, our objective is to best manage our limited curb space to safely and efficiently move people and goods throughout our city, whether that is creating space for good pedestrian crossings, commercial loading areas, dedicated bus and bike lanes, and obviously public parking. Over the last 2 years, the city has taken a number of steps to advance those three priorities. And I'm going to talk about them largely in sort of three different strategic areas. The first is to make parking more convenient. The second is to make parking better managed, and the third is to make parking less needed. So on the making parking more convenient front, with the support of the City Council, we've invested roughly $6 million over the last 12 months. We've upgraded all 8,000 parking meters in the City of Boston so that they now take credit cards and not just quarters. We launched the Park Boston app, again with the support of the City Council. This is an award-winning app that allows people to pay for their parking meters and get alerts remotely just simply by using their smartphone. And we've launched an app called PayTix, which allows people to pay parking tickets if they get one with their smartphone as well. All three of these things have been overwhelmingly positively received, and drivers are really appreciating the ability to pay digitally. In fact, today, roughly 65% of all parking transactions are done in a digital channel, either through a parking app or through a credit card. And these investments are really focused on our business districts and our Main Street districts. We're also doing a number of things, again, with the support of the council and resident groups to make parking in our residential areas easier as well. For example, we've expanded the resident permit parking program in East Boston, as well as in sections of Roxbury. We're also working to make parking simply better managed across the city. Again, here's where we've had the council's support. We were able to pilot and now make permanent an adjustment to the fine for parking in a resident permit parking area during game days around Fenway Park and increase that to $100, being able to make sure that residential parking space is for the residents who are living in the Fenway. We've also systematically been upgrading the city's 32 municipal parking lots under the commissioner's leadership and the leadership of Danny Nuzzo. The city of Boston has 32 municipal parking lots in both residential areas and Main Street districts, providing about 1,300 parking spaces to all road users. We are roughly investing between $400,000 and $500,000 each year. In the last 2 years, we've been able to redo the parking lots at 30 Ruggles Street and at Warren Ziegler in Dudley Square, and the parking lot in West Roxbury at 1891 Center Street. We also just finished upgrading the lot at 451 River Street in Mattapan Square, and soon we'll be working on the municipal lot on Georgia Street in Grove Hall. With each of these sort of reconstruction efforts, our interest is really to make those parking lots sort of better managed, better lit, more attractive. We do have conversations with resident groups and with the Department of Neighborhood Development to see if there are places in the city where residents are interested in creating greater off-street parking, as we are thinking about using on-street parking for alternative uses. Additionally, and again with the support of the City Council, we are conducting a complete survey of the parking rules in the city of Boston. This is giving us a sort of a digital atlas of parking rules in our city, which gives all of us, both the public and the city, a better way of being able to understand the implications of rule changes to our curb and how they impact things like parking or commercial loading. And finally, the city is developing a pilot around performance-based parking and looking at how small adjustments to meter rates may be able to increase the availability of parking in some of our business districts, with a portion of net new revenue potentially being reinvested back in those residential area or in those business districts. The final area of our strategy is really focused around making parking less needed, something which has been mentioned several times in the opening remarks. Certainly for some folks, driving will always be the first choice, and alternative modes won't be the best option. But we know there's lots of folks who would shed that second or third car, or who would prefer to make a trip by an alternative means, if that means we're more convenient. So two of the programs that you referenced, Councilor Baker, that we've been expanding, launching or expanding are the Drive Boston program and Hubway. Drive Boston is a program that is a partnership with Enterprise and with Zipcar to put car share vehicles in municipal lots and on city streets. We've provided 80 vehicles through that channel. The reason we're doing that is that research has basically shown that for every one vehicle that you put onto a city street, that over time, 9 to 13 personal vehicles are shed because people get rid of that second car or choose to put off purchasing a first car. We've also been hard at work expanding the Hubway program, which people, I think, find quite convenient for some short trips. So we've expanded it to East Boston, we've expanded it in Roxbury and in Dorchester over the course of this year. And thanks to the support from the council, we'll have the opportunity, I think, in the year ahead to be able to look at even further expansion of the city network. In addition to those investments, we know that in many ways a deterrent for folks to feel comfortable riding in the city, choosing to bike to a Main Street district or to a T-stop, is simply that sense of safety on city streets. So the city has been making a significant push to improve the city infrastructure, to make cycling a more comfortable experience, a safer experience for all riders in the city. Additionally, we've started working with the MBTA, with the support of the City Council, to think about how we can simply make bus service more reliable as a principal means of travel for so many of our residents. And there's great options both with how we use our signals and how we use our lanes to think about how we move people more easily throughout our city and make taking the bus simply a more convenient option. In conclusion, across a variety of different dimensions, whether it's making parking more convenient, making parking better managed, or making parking less needed, we've been taking a number of steps over the last 2 years, and very much look forward to this conversation, your questions, and the input of the folks who are here today about how we can take further steps in the future.
Thank you. Commissioner and Docker, do you care to make a statement? Or
Not
are
at
you
this
all
time,
set?
Counselor.
Okay. Director of Development and Review for the BPDA, Jonathan Green. Do you have anything to say? To add?
Not at
to
this
this
time.
conversation? Are you ready for our questions? I just have a couple before I pass it on to Frank, just because I know that everyone here has tons of questions. The municipal parking lots that we have, you said we have 32 municipal parking lots.
Yes.
And something that I would like to see, I don't know if that's possible, is some of those parking lots, particularly I look at the one on Fulton Street, I believe the BRA owns that one. Let's build some garages so we can add more parking spaces at those locations. So, so we can use them for businesses during the daytime and the residents at nighttime and snow emergencies when we have snowstorms. So that's something I would like to see. In regards to the meter rates, I've been saying this for 10 years. We're losing revenue. We should be making more money meters because we still have some of the cheapest rates in the country. And with that revenue, we could build these garages. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Councilor Frank.
Thank you. To the, good morning, Gina. These are probably mostly going to be for you. Do the parking lots generate any money? Like, do they have meters in them? How do they monitor?
No, Counselor, we don't charge for parking in the parking lots, although we do enforce time-based parking restrictions.
Okay, so you have an idea of the parking turnover, so someone can go in there and if they're there, a full day, they get towed, or?
Generally, most of the parking lots in neighborhoods are 2 hours.
Yeah.
So we would have our enforcement officers start patrol at 8 a.m., finish up patrol at 6 p.m., and they would cite vehicles that are parked over the 2-hour limit.
Okay, cite them, so. With
It would be,
ticket.
it would be an over the posted limit ticket, currently $25.
Okay. And what department maintains the parking?
Transportation Department maintains the parking lots. We have a division that is dedicated to this. And so currently right now we have an RFP that'll be out for landscaping services, and some of the renovations that Chief Osgood described are administered by our off-street parking lot division.
They run the construction of it. If there's a bigger job, a bigger job there, you have a department that maintains that. And cleanup and that sort of stuff, your department does the cleanup, or is that a contract that goes out?
We maintain contracts for the operation of those off-street parking lots. So we would be responsible for paving, pavement markings, landscaping, the lighting upgrades that Chief Osgood described. Those are all part of the capital projects that are funded that are administered by the off-street parking lot division of BTD.
Okay, does that fall under operations?
No, it doesn't. It's a separate division. The director of off-street parking is Danny Newsall.
Okay. Gina, can you go over the resident permit parking program a little bit? Any street in Boston wants resident parking. What needs to happen? Will you give us how you apply for it, the whole process, and then once it's implemented, how do we let the neighborhood know?
Sure. We have a community organizer in the transportation department that will work with community groups as well as the ONS, the Office of Neighborhood Services Coordinator, for that neighborhood. Generally, what happens is the neighborhood groups and the residents notice that there's a parking there's a parking issue, so they would initiate a process through the Office of Neighborhood Services. Could be a case where there's a popular transit hub nearby or a business district. So we would ask the neighborhood groups to canvass the area, collect signatures from the residents who are affected by this. We would go out and visit the community groups and present what the requirements are for participation in the program and work with them to design a program that meets their specific needs in terms of addressing parking availability during the hours that they need it. We would work with our engineering division to cite those signs and the parking regulations, as well as inform the residents in the community groups in terms of what the requirements are to obtain a parking permit.
Okay. And has there been any talk of maybe revisiting that residential program in terms of providing some business parking or some like my mom was sick for years, the visiting nurse, we were always getting tickets for her. There's probably a visiting nurse on 9 out of 10 streets in Boston. So what do people that have business in Boston, visiting nurses, or in a business district, if it's all residential parking around there, have we discussed any options for those sorts of issues?
Chief Osgood will probably talk more about this in terms of a long-term policy objective for transportation and streets. We do have some programs that address those needs. Business owners are allowed to participate in the resident permit program, provided that the vehicle is registered to the business at that location.
So like if you have a commercial plate, okay.
Yes, for example, a dry cleaner or a small restaurant. If the vehicle is registered to the business, we will provide a permit to that business. We have a program for visiting nurses, where if they're providing services to residents in their homes, they are exempt from parking in resident parking areas. Mm-hmm. We also have a home care provider program for members of the Home Care Alliance. We provide permits to those folks who are providing services to people in a number of different neighborhoods, and they're exempt from the resident permit restrictions.
Okay. So, and what, do they got a placard or something, or
Yes, that is
sticker?
a placard.
I've never seen them. How long have those been available?
It's been about 3 years, 3 or 4 years maybe.
Okay. And maybe one of the things that for you, John, possibly one of the things that concerns me in moving forward in the next 5 or 10 years in my district, District 3, we have a lot of development going on. So is there any sort of talk with other departments under you, Chris, and the the BPDA? Is there any talk of planning that not every empty city lot should have units on it, that maybe in concentrated areas we could start, pocket. I don't have very many. I don't know what I have for municipal lots in my district. There's none up in the north part of Dorchester Ave. There's no municipal lots at all. So I'd like to start to identify places where, and I'm not looking for structures. I'm looking for some place that might be able to accommodate 20 or 25 spots, and also what are we doing with existing land that's there? How do we deal with existing land that's there that could be parking at night, or with the snow parking? We Dorchester Ave, Pleasant Street, places like that, you can't park on them during the snow. Where is everybody supposed to go? Like, are we identifying those sorts of things?
So two separate things. On your second question, we're quite interested in exploring potentially shared use agreements for private lots to see if they can create available space for public purposes, particularly in places where, again, on-street spaces may be used for other purposes, or on-street curb areas used for other purposes. So if there is a vacant private lot that is vacant at off hours, that may be an interesting place for us to explore opening that up for public parking. Again, to sort of relieve some of the parking pressure and be able to make better use of the curb space that we actually have in our city. More generally, thinking about municipal lots right now, non-parking municipal lots, things that may be owned by the Department of Neighborhood Development. Their approach has always been to work with the council, work with resident groups, and they're open to conversations about the right use of each of those lots, understanding exactly as you said that there are a number of different interests, whether it is housing or open space or off-street parking. And so I think, not to speak for them, but I think they would be open to a
Because a
case-by-case
big concern of
conversation.
mine is like whenever there's a development going on, that it's always, oh, nobody's going to have any vehicles here, and that's just not the truth. And if we're looking to get real commercial spaces within these developments, I have a couple developments, a couple hundred units, commercial on the first floor. Those surrounding neighborhoods, the idea is have most people walk, but for the people that can't walk, if there isn't any place to park, that's a lost opportunity. So I'd like to be able to know if policy on your part is going to be, we're open to creating more parking that's available to people that they don't necessarily need to live in the city. Milton, Braintree, Somerville, they come to Boston too. So I'd hate to send that message that you're not welcome in any of our business districts because everything's residential.
So I think we're certainly open to looking particularly at if there are particular developments, we should sit down and see, are there existing sort of underutilized private parking spaces that could be opened up for public purposes? And then also, are there any other lots that may be useful for us to have a conversation around?
Yeah, and that's something probably for you, John, to as you guys are going through these big planning exercises to see where is that little pocket parking going to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple things. There's the individual kind of project by project conversation around the parking needs of the various uses on site, and I think that one of the things we've always been open to and happy to have any more specific conversations around are there opportunities in developments that have a significant commercial parking presence? Can they be part of a solution for residential needs such as, i.e., snow emergencies, et cetera, right? And then I think the larger planning conversations, there was obviously the one in JP and in South Boston right now, but I think other planning conversations we've had in the past and in the future, the goal is always to try to figure out a balanced approach to the range of different outcomes the neighborhood is going to be, right? So how a neighborhood functions at night might be different than how it functions in a 9 to 5 way. And so I think we're always looking to partner with, in the way we review almost anything, whether it's a planning exercise or a development exercise, it's often hand in hand with folks on Chris's and Gina's teams. And so I think that on some level, while we certainly have a lot of expertise in this area, we often defer and always collaborate with our sister agencies in that discussion.
And my last question is, is there an option for someone that's coming in visiting and there's no visitor parking on any streets around? Is there an option for that person to be able to apply for a temporary parking spot? And that could be a simple no.
Right now, the answer is
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Counselor. Counselor Linehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the maker, Frank Baker, for introducing this matter, and for you, Mr. Chairman, for having the hearing. I've been a district city councilor for 10 years in the most developable district in the city. We've grown in every possible way you can. We have more residents and we grow faster than any other district. We have more square footage in new development space. We have more commercial ventures. It is, District 2 is the engine that drives this city with all its rubs for all the residents, which continues to increase in this area. And the number one issue that's facing our district is transportation. The planning of it, the enforcement of it, the programming of it, the investment in it. And we are not doing enough. We are not. We are not doing enough. And we need to do more. I have a couple of pet peeves. I'm going to articulate them. The commissioner knows of them. And this is in no way to articulate that you all aren't doing a good job at what you do. It's just that the pace is beyond our capacity and has been for a long time now, 6, 7 years. And we do not catch up, and we need to jump ahead, or we're going to fall further behind and be in gridlock. I have this, most people don't understand this, but there's at least 4 to 5, maybe even 6 $1 billion developments in my district. You can look it up. They're going on. They're either in the ground, under construction, or they're in the queue. That is amazing. So, over 2.5 years ago, we implemented a pilot program in cooperation with Transportation, Office of Neighborhood Services, to expand resident parking from a 4-day-a-week exercise to a 7-day-a-week, and continuing to leave those times during the day, 10 to 6, available for all the uses that might occur, which is different. This is in South Boston, which is different than Bay Village, which is different than the South End, which is different than Fort Point. The traditional South Boston. We did a test on 10 weekends. 10 weekends. We issued 2,000 tickets in those 10 weekends at $40 a piece for people who were parking in resident parking on weekends in the pilot area. It was a concentrated enforcement effort in at that location. $80,000 was raised. We did it on overtime at time and a half for the enforcement officers that were in South Boston and in that geographical area of the pilot test area. That cost $28,000. We netted $52,000 net on overtime. The rest of the community wants it. It has wanted it. I've lobbied and plead for it. And then in this last budget session, 29 enforcement officers, their positions were removed from the budget. I was against it. The argument was we still had 29 enforcement officers that need to be hired to fill existing, I wouldn't call it capacity, but the existing number of people that we've been hiring at a regular basis, because it was 30 more people. So we eliminate some. So the real issue here is enforcement for this particular program. And then we reduce it because we haven't been using them. Well, the argument is that we need to have more enforcement officers if we're going to program and create policies that are going to allow all those things you talked about in the beginning in an open. I've gone to everybody. Got nowhere. I'm pissed. First time ever. So I want something done about it. because there's other programs that I can't even begin to initiate with the administration to make it better to live in parts of the district without this resolve. And I've supported and worked with all of you in almost every capacity, whether it's multimodal transportation, whether it's developing plans for transportation in the South Boston waterfront and identifying monies. A lot, yeah. And I've worked with the commissioner on the one-ways during the snow removal and everything else. So I want to resolve this. And I don't mean to take this particular hearing to try and get this thing done, but it's an example of if you're going to do these things, we gotta do them. So other comments, expanding parking lots, great idea. Put parking meters in the parking lots. As far as I'm concerned, I think that they'll be turned over a lot quicker. And if people don't comply, then you get to cite them. And then there's more revenue. And this revenue should be going back into addressing the transportation issues from your perspective, Jonathan's perspective, and the commissioner's perspective. For her, it's operations. Give her some more money, get some more stuff done so we can get this stuff moving. And on the planning side, or like Frank had suggested, we could identify some lots. We have money in the parking meter fund that could turn vacant lots into more parking spaces that could be utilized by businesses and the like. We're just not aggressive. We're in a new place. I'm the oldest guy in the building half the time in the room, right? We're in a place that's moving faster than we've ever moved, and we all have to pick up the pace. So this is the issue. It's transportation, and it's going to bump into everything else we do. On the development side, is it true that we continue, because I have developers say this to me, that we will continue to have non-resident parking sticker developments? You know what I'm saying by that? Is that true? Do we still entertain that so that they won't have a lot of parking in the development? It's near transit orientated, but they won't, just to ensure the rest of the neighborhoods, they won't be issued resident parking. We have that particular instance in a couple of locations throughout the district, specifically in the south end on Tremont Street. We have it there. And is that continuing to happen? Because we're walking density right into the middle of gridlock here.
So my understanding is that that is something that remains a policy, right? So that if we develop a project and they have a lower parking ratio, saying based on the need that they articulate that the project will generate, that there's also the option in conjunction with the transportation department to put that property on a list that would exempt you from the ability to pull a resident parking sticker, right? So the idea that if you want to have a car, you have to park it in the building which you're living, not on the city street. So that's a program and a partnership that my understanding is still in place.
Does anybody have any idea how many buildings there are in the city that are like that?
We can get that for you, though.
I think I made my point. Good
job.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, for that. Appreciate it. I beg my indulgence to all my colleagues.
Yeah. But I really wish that the administration would address the issue of funding enforcement, because we need more enforcement in neighborhoods. So that's something that I hope that you will come back and to address. Councilor Flaherty.
I'm usually the yeller and the fist banger here, but I'll concur with the chair, Council Lamontina, with respect to expanding parking opportunities at our municipal lots and garages, and would also support multi-level structures. I know our colleague, Councilor Baker, who's the lead sponsor here, had talked about some creative partnerships where we have some commercial and or residential opportunities within parking structures. So I think the time has come. And it also it supports our local businesses, but it also deals with the overcrowded and overdevelopment that's taking place. It predates a lot of you folks. It was the previous administration and the previous BRA that had this cockamamie 0.08 space per unit and they envisioned very delusionally that people were going to be walking and taking bikes and owning skateboards. When the fact of the matter is that the unit owners, they own vehicles. They're working families. They get 2 jobs. They get kids. They're driving them to hockey and soccer and Pop Warner, et cetera. So, and the fact that we have thousands of new units coming online, once again, it would be delusional for the BRA to be even thinking that none of those folks and none of those prospective new unit owners are not going to be owning and driving vehicles. It's just delusional. And so I would argue that the goal to increase the vehicle per unit capacity does a couple things. It controls the density, and will help other neighborhoods that haven't already been overdeveloped. And it'll hopefully eliminate some of the congestion that we're seeing. And it's become a daily occurrence. It's no longer rush hour. High Park Ave and High Park, Brighton Ave and Brighton, Dorchester Ave and Dorchester, Meridian Street in East Boston, A Street in South Boston. Just pick streets, main thoroughfares and cut-throughs are bumper to bumper, morning, noon, and night. And that's largely because of the overdevelopment in a lot of our communities and because the parking requirement was lax. It was 0.08. So that obviously, hopefully, is addressed moving forward. And by increasing that parking, and the other part that the BRA has to do is you have to require the developers through the permitting process to deed that spot to the unit in a condo situation or to assign that spot to a unit in a rental situation. Because what happens, they charge more for the parking, person's paying through the nose to get into the unit, and then they just decide to park on the neighborhood streets, which takes takes the spots away from abutters and neighbors in that community when there's sufficient and ample parking within the project. So Council Linehan sort of talked about that issue on the resident parking side of it, but that plays itself out across the city. And I speak as an at-large councilor. You'll have a beautiful development project with sufficient parking to support the number of units, and no one's parking in the building because the owner is charging them an arm and a leg for the additional spot. And why would they do that? They'll just go downtown and get a residential parking sticker and park out front of their building. So by requiring them to deed the spot to the unit and or to assign it to a unit in a rental situation should eliminate some of the parking woes in some of our communities. And obviously, the underlying issue for me is, and to ask you, Chris, what is being done with respect to the handicap parking fraud and abuse? It's clear and consistent every single day. People in suburban communities get a handicap parking placard, come into the city of Boston. They stay there all day long. They're not paying the meter, so we're losing the revenue. They're taking a very precious spot and not helping and supporting our local businesses. Every single one of our able-bodied members in this chamber, particularly my colleagues, could get a doctor to get them sign a note, and they could get a handicap parking placard. And that's what happens. Suburban folks come in to Boston, and they get a spot right in front of their office building, and they put the placard up, and they throw their nose up at the meter, and they go into that office for 12, 10, 14 hours, and they come back out. Those are people, if we had some enforcement and we changed the rules, would not be allowed to do that. They'd either be taking public transportation or carpooling or paying the meter and then having to move like everyone else has to move after the 2 hours. So there's a big problem, and we lose out on hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably millions every year. But that problem has not been addressed appropriately by people in decision-making positions. So working with, and I wish we had the Disabilities Commission down here to address it as well. But working with, and I know Commissioner Fiandaco and I have been working closely on this, and then we continue to hit a little bit of a wall up at the state. That has to stop. In the city of Boston, if you're perpetrating a fraud and you're able-bodied and you're using a handicap placard to get a free spot in front of your office because you don't want to pay for a parking garage, or you don't want to take public transportation, or you don't own a skateboard, or you don't rollerblade to work, right? Or you don't own a bike, we have to crack down on that. And again, you're talking millions in revenue, and you're talking about the inconvenience, and particularly, the first and foremost, the person that the most offensive part of this, the revenue aside and the lack of parking space, the most offensive portion of this is the poor person that has the disability or has limited access, or a parent of a child, and they need that spot. And they find themselves circling around the block when able-bodied people are popping out of cars left and right, a lot of them construction vehicles from New Hampshire, all right, because they're working construction jobs downtown.
Sort of a bit of the state conversation that Commissioner McCosh and I believe Commissioner Fiandaco have been a part of. I think it's useful for us to sit with you, and we can give you an update about where that state conversation is and the policy recommendations that are coming out of that task force.
Great. And it starts with requiring folks to pay the meter. right? Like everybody else. And I think that in large part will eliminate the perpetration of the fraud, because the minute the person, and again, the issue about not paying the meter was for dexterity issues. That's been solved because we now have the apps, and folks that have issues around dexterity, that problem has been solved. Why we're not now requiring folks that are parking at meters to pay the meter? Therein is the loophole, Chris. And when they get to skate on that, they get to perpetrate the fraud, and that continues to happen on a daily basis, particularly in the downtown. But we're also starting to see it out in some of our local business districts as well. And so we've done enough talking about it, Chris. Time for action, and we just need to put in place that if you're coming into the city of Boston and you're parking at a meter, no matter who you are, it's just a matter of basic fairness and equity. You pay the meter, plain and simple, and that eliminates the fraud. And the minute that they have to pay the meter and they start getting tickets, or they have to leave their place of employment and jockey around spots and go to different blocks, because after the 2 hours, if you're on the same block, you get another ticket. There's only so many times you can do that when your employer turns around and says, hey, take the train, or hey, carpool, or walk to work. But they get a free pass on it. And again, they're laughing at us, Chris. They're laughing at us, and we're losing out on millions of dollars. And furthermore, the poor person that actually has the need and actually needs the spot for legitimate purposes is up against fraud and abuse. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is turning out to be a pretty tense hearing so far. I think you're hearing all of my colleagues channeling the frustration that we hear on a daily basis from our constituents in the neighborhood. So I want to underscore what our District 2 colleague was saying about transportation really being the top of the agenda, and so therefore how important all of your work is. I guess I want to just start by saying I really think we're all, probably everyone in this room is here for the same goals, which is understanding that our city is growing, and so therefore we need to get more people moving around the city, using our streets with as short a commute as possible, and as ideal, as few cars involved as possible for the larger global environmental emissions reasons that other departments are working on, as well as just the public health impacts, and really needing to frame parking as an environmental justice issue as well. When someone is circling around for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, sometimes an hour in some of our neighborhoods to find parking, the emissions that is generating, and again, causing higher incidences of asthma and other physical ailments immediately in the neighborhoods. So we want it to be easier to take the T or take the bus rather than to drive, and ideally we want on-street parking to be more expensive than private garage parking, because in the perfect world, in some of the cities that are doing this well, you know that you can get a spot right away that's cheaper if you just go in the garage and then you don't have to circle around, rather than thinking, well, I don't want to pay $40, $60 to park in the garage, so I'm going to try my luck. I'll circle for 30 minutes. If I don't find a spot, then I'll do that. If the pricing were reversed, that's how we get those incentives aligned. We have to do a lot. Anyway, we can't control what private garages charge, but we can control, I was thinking 3 things. So pricing of our spots, the number of spots that we have available, and the enforcement of it. So if you'll indulge me, I wanted just to walk through these 3 categories, kind of get your thoughts on a couple things. So in terms of pricing, with demand responsive pricing, I know we've seen a couple announcements over the last year about when pricing, particularly in the downtown business districts, will change and adjust and be increased. What's the status of that? When will that happen?
Sure. So we are developing essentially a baseline plan to figure out the right way to launch a pilot around this, looking at where the places we would have the best impact, what would be the policies around how price could potentially adjust based upon availability or occupancy of the spaces. And then that third piece, which was recently allowed through the municipal modernization bill, of thinking about is there a way that we can establish essentially something like a parking benefit district where a portion of any net new revenue would be able to go back to those particular areas. So we look forward to working with this body as sort of that pilot is developed, and to get your feedback on that.
So if the council will take up the municipal modernization bill, potentially this fall,
Yep.
You're working on the parking policy study. When can we expect to see some demand responsive pricing somewhere in the city?
So our expectation would be that we would have something, a proposal to present by the end of this year, if
Great.
and like sooner.
Okay. And I love hearing that the idea of neighborhood benefit districts is being considered as well. Are you thinking about piloting specific neighborhoods, or how will you decide where that will happen?
So we're looking sort of first at discrete areas. This is something we want to try. There's a number of things that we want to figure out how to do and do right, which is from the evaluation side to the public communication side to simply the process of actually managing this. So it's not something which we would start citywide. It's something we would start in a discrete area.
Okay, great. I mean, I guess one plug for that and pushing up the speed of that is that I think it would be, whenever you talk to residents about potentially increasing the price of parking, the vast majority get very angry. However, if it's framed as we are asking for everyone to pay their fair share and knowing that they'll be able to see tangible improvements from those charges in their specific neighborhoods, I think would make the conversation go a lot better and make more sense citywide as well. Okay, so my second bucket around the number of spots and frankly the need to reduce on-street parking in a lot of cases if we are going to accommodate cycle tracks, dedicated bus lanes. These are trade-offs. I'm just curious where the trade-off point is being set. Is it by engineering studies and parking studies, or is it some combination with community feedback? And
So right now we've been looking at, as you're aware, sort of at some principal corridors on the in terms of improving bus service, building off of the CTPS report that looked at where there are high numbers of riders going at very low speeds in the city of Boston, and looking at how can those corridors actually be improved through anything from signal treatments to lane treatments. Obviously, through the Vision Zero program, we were looking at what those key commuter corridors are and the crash corridors in our city, and thinking about how curb can better be used or moved to protect cyclists or other vulnerable road users. So it's that combination of both sort of bus usage or mass transit usage statistics, congestion statistics, and crash statistics that are guiding a lot of our work. What is going to be very useful in this effort is the sort of the parking rule atlas. We'll actually have a good picture of sort of on every block face, what are all the rules that determine parking, so we can have or parking, loading zones, et cetera, so we can sort of best tailor the use of any particular curb for use over time. Right now, your second category of how many parking spaces we have in a particular area, that is something that we don't have as fine a grained picture of as we would like, or a single snapshot of the city at this point, but that's something which BTD is working on.
Great. And again, I just want to emphasize here, as I've done privately, that I think it just can't be a one-to-one decision point, that we can't say we're only going to do this if we can relocate every single car somewhere else. And then finally on enforcement, so one issue that's been brought up to me by constituents is the frustration that there's a category to report this on 311 around parking violations, but by the time you report it and it's addressed, everybody's moved on, and particularly when it's a car or a delivery truck blocking a bike lane. Any way that we can have a faster response time or some other program to address that?
So in the last month, I believe there were about 2,600 311 requests around parking enforcement. And obviously there are times when a double parked car gets reported, and by the time the parking enforcement officer gets there, to your point, the car has moved on. One of the things we're interested in doing is analyzing all of those requests that we get for parking enforcement, and thinking about how that impacts both our deployment strategy and the design of our infrastructure more generally. So this would be a way of taking past reports and informing kind of future deployment work, as well as future road design efforts to minimize the amount of things like double parking we would see in the future.
Okay. And is there any training, or what's the sort of default for how the enforcement officers are asked to treat cars that are either idling there or any way that we can push them just to ticket right away rather than say, okay, move on along and shift the problem somewhere else?
So the commissioner can be better to this than I can, but they are often going to focus on just simply solving the problem right there, so they will get the car to move on, and occasionally they will write tickets, but their first priority is to clear what is preventing either the smooth flow or safe flow of traffic.
I think that would be, that would be more acceptable if we could be sure that where the car's moving onto, there were another enforcement officer there ready. But because we don't have enough as it is, as you heard, the fact that it really just feels like we're just shifting this elsewhere and not solving anything.
One program that we piloted that has been very successful is using our bike patrols to enforce double parking or our bike lanes. And just recently, we conducted a pilot right here on Cambridge Street, and we changed some of the hours of the loading zones. And that had a real positive impact on traffic flow. What we've done is we've taken an approach where we can look at specific corridors, better utilize our bike patrols, and affect compliance more so than punitive measures of waiting until the vehicle is parked there and then ticketing them.
Okay, my last enforcement point is on holidays and Sundays. So currently, there's no charge for parking on is it every Sunday and most federal holidays or city holidays.
That's correct. Meters are not in effect on Sundays and on legal holidays. There are some other parking regulations that would remain in effect, such as public safety violations.
Okay, well, I would ask that the parking policy reevaluation also consider that. I mean, I know tradition is important, but the fact is that because Boston is such a popular city now, I mean, there's so many people trying to get around and visit go downtown or go shopping or take their family out. It's harder to get there if the parking is free and there are all the cars circling around. Okay, so those are my things. And then Councilor McCarthy asked me to just bring up an issue that Rosendale Village Main Streets had brought up to him about small business parking. I think Councilor Baker talked about this a little before. But his question was, could there be a parking permit for Main Street's business owners that they would pay for so they could park all day at some point? Because even if we add meters and even if there's a neighborhood business district, parking benefit district, which is great, the fact is that employees and small business owners shouldn't be expected to move their cars every 2 hours if they do have to drive.
Again, we have the business owners that are eligible to participate in the resident permit program. Currently, there's no provision for employee parking, but as we further examine our resident permit policies in terms of how we best manage our curbside space, we'll certainly have that conversation with Councilor McCarthy.
Great. And so just to clarify, sorry, I missed this a little earlier. It's the owner, they have to have commercial plates and
They need not have commercial plates, but the vehicle does need to be registered to that business. So the vehicle would be registered at the neighborhood location in the name of the business.
okay, and it's one vehicle per business.
Yes,
Okay. And what's the charge for that?
there's no charge for a permit.
Okay, well, there's something we should look at. Okay, thank you very much. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything from Councilor McCarthy. Great, I think that's good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilor Anissa Sabi George.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councilor Baker, for bringing this to us. I have a couple questions about our parking inventory. You did say we don't know what we've got for spots across the city. What about residential permits that have been given out? How many have we given?
We currently have approximately 100,000 active parking permits in the city.
And then how many business, or is that part of that number?
That's included in that number. I could get that number for you, though.
Curious. And then what about handicap spots? How many do we have marked off across the city?
That would again be part of our parking inventory. So we have a number of parking spaces that are located in the downtown district, but we also have spaces that are allocated in the neighborhoods.
And then the ones that are allocated, especially in our neighborhoods, have we ever revisited ones that may not be used anymore?
I know that's come up on a case-by-case basis, and we can find out whether it's a regular.
We can find that out from the Commission on Persons with Disabilities. The request for a sign in a neighborhood originates with that agency, and the Transportation Department would install the sign upon approval by the commission.
And
So-
with those signs, once they're up, they don't come back down ever.
I believe there is a process to renew those, but I would need to confirm what exactly that process is through the Commission for Persons with Disabilities.
I'm under the assumption, and if it's wrong, I would like to have it corrected, that once those HP signs go up, they are not ever removed, and even if someone moves or is deceased, that family members typically continue to use that spot in that placard. So I'd like to have a better understanding of what that process is, especially for the removal of them if it's no longer in use. And I think we should also probably take a look, I think Council Lamatina may support this, but take a look at the process of having them up, because there is quite a bit of abuse and sort of stretching of the actual story when they go up.
We would welcome facilitating that conversation.
Great. So I do have some concerns about commercial delivery zones, off-peak delivery times, and really promoting that. And then sort of the problem and the challenge of double parking, and whether a 311 snap picture could actually result in a ticket being submitted or processed.
So photo enforcement, you can,
Photo enforcement? Is that what-
that's essentially,
Yeah.
like, could a photograph taken through 311?
Unfortunately, we are not allowed to issue tickets through photo enforcement, so we do depend on the 311 to alert our enforcement officers to visit that location and enforce the regulation. Again, what we have done through some coordination with the Department of Innovation and Technology and the Office of New Urban Mechanics is identify some key corridors that we've targeted through utilization of our bike patrols, and really stepping up enforcement and affecting compliance before those vehicles double park. Also, really examining what the utilization of the curbside space is so that we can better allocate that to loading times when those businesses actually need access, and ensuring that we are enforcing the loading zone restrictions so that private passenger vehicles are not parked there, so that the commercial vehicle can get to the curb.
In my neighborhood, where I also have a business, there's a real safety issue with, and I appreciate those crossing placards, I forget what they're called,
The pedestrian delineators.
those delineators. When we have those delineators, which I like, but then we have double park vehicles, delivery trucks often, or just cars, running in and out of local businesses, that it often presents an added security or safety issue, because cars are avoiding the double parked car, crossing into the other lane, but then that delineator may be there or too close, and it creates quite a cluster and safety issue from my experience. My other concern or question is really about providing perhaps more 15-minute parking spots in some of our business districts to allow for that quick, I'm popping into that business, as opposed to competing with a residential sticker that could be there all day, or a 2-hour parking spot. How do we use that 15-minute parking spot, and do we use it widely? Is it abused? Is it underused?
We do have a number of spaces throughout the city that are designated for 15-minute parking short term. One thing that we do know is that our parking policies have to keep pace with the utilization of the curb. And when those businesses change, perhaps they do need some short-term parking, and we're always willing to work with the community to provide the best access for those businesses.
All right, and then two last things. Just really, as we look at our parking policy as a city, that we keep in mind late night or shift workers, especially as some neighborhoods go to residential at certain hours, and individuals, especially with issues with the T and no late night service, that those shift workers may be coming in and leaving at hours that don't match residential parking restrictions. And I'd also like to have some conversation, doesn't have to happen today because I think it's a bigger one, but maybe connected to what some of Council Linehan was referring to. But when we consider parking ratios for new developments, do we also consider how the commercial space will be used, and whether we're supporting customers of that commercial space and or the employees and the business owners of those commercial spaces, that perhaps we have to consider that when we think of those ratios. I think that's it for me. That was food for thought that I'd love to have, perhaps continued conversations around. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council Siomo.
Thank you. Hi, Chris, Jonathan, Commissioner. Does anybody know what the current population of the city of Boston is like as of around now?
It's just under 670, I believe.
670. And I think it's gone up, what?
50,000 in the last
Right.
5 years. give or take.
And I think Vision 2030 estimates about 800,000 people.
I think the Imagine Boston 2030 effort anticipates that by 2030 we will hit 700,000 people.
700.
And some projections would say that that might happen sooner than 2030.
Right. So I'm another one of the old guys on the council, and been here almost 9 years. And there's been a huge evolution in communities in the way the city policy is around parking. And I'm talking more about future development, past, current, and future development. And when I first got elected, people wanted like one parking space per bedroom. That was like the norm at the community groups. They wouldn't support anything unless it was almost like one per bedroom. And over time now, we're actually currently struggling to get one-to-one parking in developments. And, a lot of the developers, the buzzword is transit-oriented development. And in communities like Alston, Brighton in particular, you have a overcapacity B-line. You have buses that run frequently, but inefficiently at best during peak times. And we continue to, talk about we don't need that much parking. Now, I agree that the younger generation now uses cars less. I get that. I experience it. I have 2 millennials myself. However, there are older people that still drive. There are families that I don't know any family that doesn't have at least one car. And I want to know what we're doing to really study this. And let me tell you what I tried to do. And I was, basically hit a brick wall. So I looked at about a half a dozen to 10 of the most recent developments in my neighborhood and spoke to every property management and owner. And these developments were basically one-to-one parking. And I said, so how many do you actually rent out? And they were under the 1. They were close though, 0.9, 0.8, almost universally. But what they couldn't find out, and what I tried to find out was how many cars are actually registered to that address, right? And that way, and even still, knowing that, we're not accounting for people who don't register their cars in the city of Boston with Massachusetts plates, and we're certainly not counting out-of-state plates, which are numerous across the city of Boston. So I called the DMV, RMV, and asked if they could get me a list of registered cars to an address, and they couldn't do that. So I guess what I'm asking is, can we all put our heads together? Like we're kind of theorizing and philosophizing about where we want to be, but we need to gather the data to support it. And, just my little foray into that research, I hit a dead end, and we should be looking at that. I don't know if the city is or plans to, but I would say I think it's really important because I don't get calls to my office to take down resident parking because we have too much parking. I don't hear from my constituents that the traffic is getting less because we have less registered cars in Boston now. So, I'm just looking for what are we doing to really get the data that's going to support this vision?
Sure. So it's a great question. A lot of the work that's been happening through the Transportation Department, led by the Commissioner and by Vineet Gupta, is the city's long-term transportation plan, Go Boston 2030. And that has been sort of a very data-informed process to figure out not just sort of where we park and how we grow, but how we move as a city. And in that we sort of really did a lot of community outreach and engagement to try to understand what is it that we could be providing as a transportation network that could really help all of us move as we grow. And it is very clear to us that our transportation network needs to be safer, it needs to be more accessible, it needs to be more reliable. So there's a lot of work which we are doing already that we've started in on each of those areas. Safety, particularly for pedestrians and for cyclists. Accessibility, thinking about options to be able to access things like car share vehicles or bike share vehicles, and reliability principally around things like the B line, the 57, and the ways in which the T is moving through our city. I very much hear that there's more that we need to do, and as we publish that report over the course of or this fall, that will give us essentially that plan that we feel confident that if we move forward on and we take action on, that it's going to help us actually move more easily throughout the city of Boston and more safely throughout the city as we continue to grow. And we're glad to sort of dive into some of the data behind that if that's useful to you.
And I think, and I don't know what we have to do. Obviously, it's the state that I think we need to engage in this, especially the RMV, to really get the real numbers. Because if we go to 700,000 people in the next 10, 15 years, even if half of them don't get cars or 75% don't get cars, we're still looking at an increase. And again, I think it's about balance, right? I mean, I've supported many projects with one-to-one parking. I even supported a project that was like 0.6, reluctantly in some ways, but I thought the location would support that because of the transit. But I really would like to see more emphasis on RMV, real numbers, where they're registering and that kind of data. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Sion. Councilor Zakim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councilor Baker, for calling this hearing, and I know for rescheduling it due to the holiday that I was out for. So I appreciate you and the chairman doing that, because certainly do have a bit to say about parking, particularly in my district. I want to thank you all for being here, and I know, Commissioner, you and your team, I talk to on a regular basis about parking issues in some of the neighborhoods I represent. And I would just want to start off by saying, I think, unlike what some of my colleagues might have mentioned today, I think in general, less parking as part of new developments makes sense. I think car sharing, if those numbers are correct, the 9 to 13 cars that come off the street is phenomenal. So I'd love to hear about what we're doing with Drive Boston, Hubway, bike parking. This is all great. Transit-oriented is great if the friggin' transit works. I mean, this is the problem. I think we are all in the right place philosophically. I think this, the planning, whatever's in vogue in the planning right now about saying we want fewer cars, we want people near transit, the green line, the orange line, the red line, that's great. I lived in Councilor Siomo's district for a couple years when I was in law school. My commute on the B line to downtown was longer than some friends who were commuting to internships in Providence. I mean, this is not your fault. So I'm not. This is the T. This is an old story here that we have something that is the economic engine, or should be, of the entire region, and it's completely disinvested. And we see these outrageous headlines in the Globe that the T is not holding their contractors accountable and is cutting workers, cutting janitors, privatizing, and they're not investing. So this is that I can continue talking about in another forum. But I just think we can't have a conversation about parking and development in the city of Boston without having the T involved, without having the Baker administration involved, not Councilor Baker, Governor Baker's administration. Exactly. We do well enough on the parking issue. But I just think, hearing this, and for me, intellectually, I agree 100%. We shouldn't, in most of the neighborhoods I represent, we shouldn't need parking or cars. But if you can't rely on the T, a lot of this sort of goes out the window and we have to improvise. So I will maybe just start off by on the car share, on the Drive Boston. You said about 80, it was 85 spaces or
80 spaces.
80 spaces around the city. I've definitely seen quite a few in my neighborhood. Where are we on that? Could you maybe talk about what the financial arrangement with Zipcar and Enterprise are, what the, if any, plans there are for expansion, or and what usage numbers, if you have any?
Yep. So we launched, I want to say in December of last year. And so it was 40 spaces for Zipcar, 40 spaces for Enterprise, a mix of both on-street and in municipal lots. They've given us some regular numbers on utilization, which are, I think, are really showing that there is a tremendous amount of interest in this program. They do pay for the right to be able to have cars at both those locations. And as we sort of get to the end of year one of this program, we definitely want to do kind of a more thorough evaluation. It's helpful to hear your feedback, though, on what you've seen. In
I know the ones that are near my place, at least, are regularly used because the cars aren't often there. So it's a good start. But I would love, as we are ending the first year, seeing that usage. And I do know, a lot of there are two aspects, I guess, to this. Is that one, I think some people were caught by surprise when they went in, and that was we did get a bit of negative response, which has since petered off, I think. But if it is expanded, I would certainly encourage more outreach, certainly to abutters and to civic associations. But having that data of the use that they're being used a lot. And another thing people always ask me is, what is the city being paid for this, or are these companies just getting a giveaway? I think is really important to any expansion or maintaining of this program, because I think it's great. And like I said, I think there's 4 within 3 blocks of my home, and more often than not, at least 2 of them are out being used, which is great. And then, Commissioner, on street occupancy permits, we had a hearing here a few weeks ago, and we're working with Councilor Flaherty in Government Operations to have another hearing on the ordinance for the temporary street occupancy permits. That's a huge number of parking spaces that are out of circulation. I know Councilor Baker and Councilor Linehan and some of my colleagues were talking about off-street parking. We got a lot of on-street parking that's not being used efficiently, that contractors are using. I've got one I was talking to Ed Hesford about the other day that is in front of my, a block away from my house. That was people took extra spaces. Luckily, a neighbor noticed, and we were able to have it inspected. There was another one in front of on my block. It's probably 5 spots. I haven't sent in a complaint about it yet, but it's empty. It's been for almost a week, and no one's parking there because it says no parking. So, we're going to work through with through our committee hearing and government operations. But I would love to use this opportunity to reiterate the need for enforcement of this, and I think through changing the fees and regulation of that program to reduce the use, and I would say the abuse and overuse of the street occupancy permits. So I don't know if that's something we can do in the anything we can do to increase the inspections and enforcement in the meantime. But I really do intend to work with my colleagues here to try and make sure the city is getting the revenue we deserve and the value for these public spaces, but also to discourage the long-term use of those permits.
Thank you, Counselor. We do look forward to having the conversation with you, particularly as we sort of wind down the construction season in the fall, and really give us an opportunity to take a good look at how we can improve the process as we move into what will hopefully be a very robust spring season.
Yeah. And I completely understand when people, whether it's for moving, whether it's for actual construction, we got to use it. I don't want to discourage that, but I think the low fee, and I think it's around $280 a month to get a space downtown if you use a street occupancy permit. That's at least $100, probably more like $200 less than it would cost to rent one. So that's something I would continue working with you and your department and others on reforming that system. And I thank you. I know we've had many discussions on it, and I appreciate that. And then my final point, I know there's probably a lot of people here in the audience who want to talk about things, because I think parking is probably the universal issue in the city of Boston. But Councilor LaMattina was talking about the weekend enforcement, and I think Councilor Linehan also, of resident parking. I live 2 blocks from Newberry Street. I see some of my neighbors are here as well. It's great that our businesses are booming, but when you have people coming out from the suburbs or even other parts of the city of Boston, and I love all my neighbors here, but taking up those spots, the resident spots, on Saturdays is bad. Sundays, if anything, is worse. Now, I understand the overtime costs, but I mean, you make it. I think as we saw when we raised the fees in Fenway and increased enforcement, Councilor Linehan was talking about in South Boston, it certainly pays for itself. So is there any reason we're not doing that? We don't have more weekend shifts, at least in a district like the Back Bay or Beacon Hill, where a lot of people are coming in to shop and to enjoy and go to restaurants, which is great, but to make sure they're not taking those resident spots on the weekend.
We currently don't have a regularly scheduled Sunday shift, but as we work through our labor management process, that is something that we'll discuss.
So is that a collective bargaining issue or is it an issue of funding? Because it seems it would pay for itself, even at double time.
It's a collective bargaining issue.
So currently they just don't work on Sundays,
Yes.
even
Counselor.
at overtime rates.
For special events, we may call them in on a Sunday if we believe that there'll be a public safety issue, but generally, no, Counselor.
Okay. Well, I would say that I would imagine, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but that if someone was going to be paying me time and a half, double time, I'd be willing to come in, a couple Sundays a year. And I think it more than pays for itself from the city's perspective. So I would really want to encourage that. If it's an issue that needs to be brought up in the next collective bargaining agreement, I certainly think that this body would support that change too. We're often talking about, we don't want, our limited fiscal resources. Our parking enforcement officers are not only improving the quality of life, I think, for everyone in our neighborhoods, but it's at best, it's revenue neutral. And I think it generally is very revenue positive. So I'd like to see that. And thank you all for your efforts. That's all I have right now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Council Baker, you has
Yeah, just two more. Let's wrap it up. I don't know if this might be for you, Chris, but Councilor Siomo was on to something about the RMV. They have those numbers, or were they just not, they don't want to give them out, or the numbers for number of registered vehicles at a property? I mean, can we task somebody with finding those things out with those important developments?
So I can certainly reach out to the RMV. I don't know if that's something like.
Yeah,
we already have
and
an action
also
on.
like the lists of the buildings that don't have resident parking.
Yep.
And John, you see me at the development meetings, and in my neighborhood, like, I'm going to be looking around to see what parking, what areas might be potentially, fit what I'm looking to do. But also for you guys, if we're saying to a developer that's 500 units and you only need to provide 250 spots, I think we as the city should be able to have some overflow or outlets in different places, and not 500 spot parking structures. But in some places they may be, warranted. Like Council Linehan, you're not Council Linehan, Lamontina. Council Lamontina is looking for an actual parking structure, which may help that whole neighborhood. He's being built and built and built. So before my neighborhoods get to the point where they're being overbuilt, I'd like to know that the people that are paying attention to these issues have that in the back of their mind. But thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want, before we open up to the public, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for being here today. We are going to have a working session because this is an ongoing issue that needs to be addressed. All right, so when we end this meeting today, we will call you in when we're going to have a working session with the council to try to address some of these issues.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now we're going to open up for public testimony. The first one will be Stacy Thompson, Mark Tedrell. And please step up to the podium and state your name and address for the record, please.
All right, thanks. I'm Stacy Thompson. I'm the executive director at Livable Streets Alliance, and my home address is 171 South Street in Jamaica Plain. First, I want to say thank you to the City Council and to the city employees for having this hearing today. It's really interesting. We sent an email out to our membership of over 10,000 people, and we had one of the strongest immediate responses about this hearing that we've had in a long time. A lot of people care about this issue. Additionally, we sent an email to our advocacy listserv of about 60 really skilled volunteers, and I have a brief suggestion list from them. I'm not going to go through all of it, but it just shows you that our perspective is that there is a problem. We all know that. That's why we're here. but that there are a lot of potential solutions. So I'm going to make it brief because I know a lot of folks want to get up here and share their thoughts. But overall, I just want to remind folks that we have GHG reduction emission goals for the city to combat climate change, and we have Go Boston 2030 goals. We intend as a city to reduce the number of people driving single occupancy cars in our streets. That is a commitment that we're making as a city, so our policies need to reflect that. Additionally, I have increased optimism that we can be creative about the parking issues. And what's interesting, Councillor, you brought up not knowing any families that don't own cars, and I had the exact same point about knowing so many families who don't own cars in our city. And these are often moms and dads who have children who take buses to school, who take buses to 1 or 2 or 3 jobs in parts of our community where it's really challenging. And the solutions for these families, the hundreds and thousands of people who don't own cars, is not to provide them with a parking space or a car, but to give them as many transportation options as possible so that they can get to those jobs, they can get to those schools, and they can get to the incredible assets in our community. So in that context, I would like to share a smattering, some echoing what city councilors have suggested and what I know that the city is working on, but some thoughts on how we can erase the false dichotomy that we don't have enough parking, but instead get creative about how we can de-incentivize single occupancy cars and incentivize a more creative use for our public space, our streets. These might include considering parking bans during peak commute times on really busy corridors so that we could create part-time bus-only lanes. This could, in commercial spaces, include instituting a variable parking rate, which we talked about, with the goal of achieving a 15% vacancy on busy blocks. We could, this has been mentioned previously, but ensure that on-street parking is more expensive than off-street parking. It's a pretty straightforward thing that I think we can all do. Meters and pricing running on Sundays and holidays we've heard come up a few times. And in residential areas, there's a lot that we can do for permits. For example, if a household is going to have more than one permit, let's make those 2 or 3 permits more expensive. We could introduce paid guest permitting so that guests who are coming into neighborhoods have to pay to use that space, and our neighbors all around us have similar policies. And of course, considering adding loading, drop-off, pickup zones in residential districts so that people, Amazon can drop off stuff so that Ubers and Lyfts can drop people off. This is literally one tiny little piece of a much larger list that I'm happy to send to the City Council and staff. But thank you. My overall message is we have a ton of solutions. The answer isn't more parking, it's being creative. Thanks.
Thank you. Mark, you have? Okay, and Sarah Freeman and Doug Johnson, you're up next.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Councilors Baker and LaMattina for ordering this hearing. My name is Mark Tedrow. I live at 169 Sycamore Street in Rosendale. And I'm a member of Walk Up Rosendale, Livable Streets Alliance, and Rosy Bikes. The following comments are my own. The City of Boston cannot get itself out of its current parking and traffic problems by building more parking for single occupancy vehicles. We cannot continue to funnel more and more cars into the city center if we want to make the city work. We are already building thousands of needed housing units and are well on our way to thousands more, all without considering the transportation problems that these additional residents will cause our fair city. Increasing the efficiency of surface transportation is the only way that we can move more and more people around the city. We cannot make our roads wider. We cannot create more travel lanes for single occupancy vehicles without causing even more congested streets than we have today. On-street parking isn't the solution, but it is very much the problem. MassDOT and the MBTA have identified major bus corridors throughout the city where buses are delayed needlessly in the effort to treat a bus carrying 45 people, the same as single occupancy vehicles, and has been doing this for decades. Buses experience major delays on certain corridors, and these delays will only worsen with the increase in residents from developments already in construction. On many of these corridors, MBTA riders comprise 40 to 60% of roadway users. If buses can be made faster, more efficient, even more riders will take the bus and more people can commute into Boston without increased congestion. Only if we provide parking restrictions on many MBTA bus routes can we substantially increase bus performance and carry more passengers with the same number of buses that we already have. On many of these corridors, on-street parking restrictions need only occur on the inbound side in the morning and the outbound side in the evening. Washington Street in Rosendale between Forest Hill Station and Rosendale Village is an example of this. Currently, 11 bus lines share the roadway with cars in 2 lanes with parking on either side. Backups over half a mile long are a common occurrence. This section of roadway has 20,000 MBTA bus riders daily, comprising 60% of all the roadway users on that section of the corridor, according to the MBTA. If parking was restricted on the inbound side in the morning and a temporary bus and bike lane created, buses could travel the corridor with very few delays and move more people in a shorter amount of time with the same number of buses that they are currently using. The same parking restrictions could apply in the evening with the same results. Other routes that the MBTA has identified are North Washington Street, Huntington Ave near the Riverway, Warren Street, Blue Hall Ave, Ruggles Street, Brighton Ave, and the northern half of Mass Ave. Transit signal priority also needs to be installed, as well as signalized crosswalks along these corridors as well. Therefore, I urge the Boston City Council and the Boston Transportation Department to seriously consider putting parking restrictions in place on crowded bus corridors to facilitate the movement of people, not cars. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Freeman. Doug Johnson, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. Whoops. I'm Sarah Freeman. I signed in as Arborway Coalition, but I should probably clarify we haven't had a formal, I'm representing myself primarily in these comments, although the Arborway Coalition does have a commitment to a shared use, multi-use vision, green vision for the area. Thank you for taking on this difficult problem. Our city's growing and with big plans ahead. But while we evolve and have a chance to plan ahead, I feel like we're at a crossroads that we can think about, oh, more people, more cars, more parking, as we've traditionally done and as people can do in suburbia or rural areas. But that's not what makes a good city. If you look at great cities around the country and the world, there's almost an opposite, counterintuitive, that the more parking, the more public downtown space is dedicated to cars and parking, the worse experience that city is. So I guess I'm talking about different standards maybe for the neighborhoods and downtown, but unlike some of the more knowledgeable people in the crowd, I'm just a well-intentioned private resident. I don't study this stuff all day. I did a Google search for correlation, not favorable or unfavorable, between parking and business. And everything I found is the more parking, the more you make bike lanes and other things, the better it is for the business. And I will share, now that I've assembled some of this, I will share it to the email site. Sorry I don't have printouts, but I just encourage the city to be a little daring and progressive in thinking what kind of a city we want to have as we accommodate the influx and address the climate issues and sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Doug Johnson, you here? Eric Herod, and Eric Buckley. Name and address for the record, please.
Sure. My name is Doug Johnson. Unfortunately, I live in Medford, but I work at 375 Dudley Street in Roxbury. I work for the Boston Cyclists Union, and I'm also a professor of transportation at Boston University. Normally, when I come to these things, I tell you all about how great bikes are and that we should all just ride bikes and there wouldn't be any problems with cars or parking. But I also have a car, so I'm going to save you the bike sermon, and we'll just talk about car parking today.
Thank you.
No problem, counselor. When I drive to work, guess where I park? In a municipal parking lot for free all day. It's great. I really appreciate it. And I thought to myself, if I was going to move into the city of Boston, what would I do for a residential permit? I just want to read you something. This pretty much sums up all of the problems that all of us have identified today. I was like, how much is it going to cost for a resident parking permit if I move into the city? I look on the City of Boston website, and I quote, "There is no charge for resident parking permits." Brutal. I don't know if you remember that Boston Globe article last year about parking permits. There's a guy who lives in the South End who has 11 parking permits to his name. He owns a bunch of sports cars, and theoretically he could park all of them on the street if he wanted to. The City of Boston doesn't charge him anything for these permits, and it doesn't limit the number of permits that he can have. That seems outrageous. If I told you the BRA was sitting on a bunch of, the BPDA, yeah, no problem. If I told you they were sitting on a bunch of property that they own, that they were collecting no revenue from, you'd probably all be pretty upset and you'd hold a hearing about it, right? You'd be like, why aren't we collecting tax revenue from that? Well, you're sitting on a massive amount of property and you're collecting no revenue from it. I wish that Councilor Linehan was still here because he would love this. Charge people for the resident parking permits. $10 a year, $20 a year. The amount of money you'd bring in would cover so much for the transportation department. It would go a long way to improving a lot of our transportation systems. Moreover, you should not let a single person have 11 parking permits to their name. Maybe limit it to like 3 or 4. That seems more reasonable. It would be an easy sell to your constituents because you can tell them that all the money you're going to collect for those permits will go into a parking benefit district, which will benefit their neighborhood. Tell them it will fix their sidewalks. It will fill their potholes. They'll love it. If you told people, would you pay 50 cents a week or a little bit less than that to have better sidewalks and no potholes, would you do it? I bet all your constituents would say yes. They would definitely do it. That's the sell. That's all you have to tell them. They'll buy it. It's great. And it'll work out a lot better for the city. All of that said, we really should be doing more to encourage people to ride bikes, obviously. I rode my bike here today and I didn't have to worry about parking. It was great. Give it a try sometime and you'll be like, wow, why do I struggle to park places when I could just ride bikes? So thanks.
Thank you, Doug. That was very helpful. Now, where's that municipal parking lot? Eric? Rod and Eric Buckley. Name and address for the record, please.
That's Eric Herrott, Herot, 155 Amory Street, Jamaica Plain, apartment 3. I also work in Boston in the now known Innovation District. So actually, it's interesting that we're here to talk about parking, but I really want to make the issue kind of more about affordable housing. It's kind of disappointing that this issue doesn't get more attention because I feel like in the end, these two things are not only inextricably linked, but it is the proximate cause of the housing crisis. Some people may be aware of the fact that you basically cannot build a triple decker in Boston today unless you're tearing down an old one. And one of the main reasons for that is parking requirements. If you own a plot just large enough to fit a triple decker, and you actually want to put a parking garage on the plot, there's no way to recoup the cost without making the development substantially larger. And of course, if you want to make it larger, you have to go through the entire variances process, and you incur a ton more costs. It takes years. It is absolutely one of the reasons that an average unit of housing in Boston now costs about $400,000 to construct, which is beyond the means of the average middle class family. Like the bread and butter of affordable housing stock, and that is not to say subsidized affordable housing, but housing that is cheap enough to build that middle class people can afford it, is the triple decker, a wood framed structure without an underground parking garage. There is nowhere in the country right now that is currently building housing that middle class people can afford that also requires it to have parking on the plot. It's not possible. It hasn't been done anywhere in the world. To the issue of addressing the parking shortages on the street, because obviously these two issues have to be addressed in tandem if you don't want to piss off everybody that lives in the neighborhood. There's also no examples of any cities that have ever built their way out of a parking crisis. Any city that considers itself even remotely vibrant has a parking problem, at least in the United States. That is to say, people think there's less parking than there should be. But I was just looking at the numbers for the city of Hartford, which since 1960 has essentially tripled its supply of downtown parking to the point where something like half of all of the downtown real estate is actually devoted to car storage. And they still have a parking problem, but they've lost most of their residents who have since moved to the suburbs. It hasn't helped their economy. All it's really done is caused more people to drive into the city and more people to drive home at the end of the day. So really what I want to just emphasize is every problem that's been discussed here with on-street parking, it's essentially an artifact of price controls, which is the situation we've created for ourselves. We don't want to ask people to pay more for it. So we've created an archaic network of different ways to make sure that everything gets divided up in ways that everybody can make use of it. 2-hour parking, which of course pisses off restaurant owners because they want people to be able to sit for longer than that. And a million different varieties of placards so that people can make sure that they get to park at the times that they actually want to. But in the end, it's so simple. Everything here could be addressed by simply charging what the on-street spaces are worth. You wouldn't have to worry about visitors. You wouldn't have to worry about everybody in the neighborhood, like in Southie, where you have enough parking permits that you have more parking permits than spaces. You wouldn't have to worry about new buildings coming in and people registering their cars on the streets. I personally really bristle at the idea that newcomers to a neighborhood should have a different set of rules applied to them than people who already live there. This would address that. Charge what it's worth. It's not that controversial. No one complains about the price of on-street parking in Boston, and I don't think this would change that. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Buckley, Steve Souza.
Hello, my name's Eric Buckley. I live at 10 Thatcher Street in Boston in the North End. I really just kind of want to reiterate what the last two speakers have said. The primary reason for the problem is that the parking is free. There is no shortage of parking in Boston. I work in the design and construction industry, so I read a lot of the BRA Article 80 filings, and I just read the Government Center garage filing. They have 2,310 spots that they have now. They said their peak load is 50% capacity. So meaning every minute of every day downtown, there's about 1,100 unused parking spots because they cost money, right?
In that one development?
In that it's existing. It's the Government Center garage, right? So the reason why those are empty and the streets are full is because the streets are free. I live in the North End. I have 2 little kids and my wife. We live in a tiny apartment. We do have a car only because it's free, right? And my biggest stressor every day when I'm in the city is when I'm taking my 2 kids and we're going to our backyard, which is the playground. So I got to hold their hands on sidewalks that are too small with cars that drive too fast. So what I encourage the council to do is really look at our mobility of the whole city and how we can make it safer and more equitable for everyone who uses the streets, not just the cars and not just the park.
Thank you. Steve Souza. Marty Glenn. Marty here? No. Mark and Buna. Marty. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having this hearing on this very important topic and for allowing me to speak. I'm Marty Glenn. I live at 11 Payson Avenue in Dorchester in Councilor Baker's district. And I'm also the president of the Hancock Street Civic Association, which represents the neighborhood just southeast of Upham's Corner. And I have been since June. It's turning out to be a full-time job. We've had a lot of new positive development at Upham's Corner in the past several years, but a lot of that development has also had the impact of reducing parking in the neighborhood. So we've had a reconfiguration of the traffic pattern at the corner of Hancock Street and Columbia Road, so that there is no longer parking in the right-hand lane to allow for a right-hand turn onto Columbia Road, which is a positive thing. The former Bell Furniture, for anyone who knows it, was redeveloped several years ago into the Cape Verdean Adult Day Center, which is a very valued resource in our community. This is highly used by a lot of people. But that block is in front of the building is now restricted 7 days a week to van use. There's a new charter school, fabulous charter school, that's using what was a former nursing home at 121 Hancock Street. And so that's now restricted several times during the day for school bus use. And these are all important uses. Traffic has increased on Hancock Street over the past several years to the point where it's frequently just about impossible to turn left onto Hancock Street towards Upham's Corner at several points during the day. Another factor, I hesitate to bring this up because I have no idea what can be done about this, but another factor that is probably contributing to the increase of traffic on Hancock Street is the increased use of apps that direct drivers off arteries onto secondary roads during peak times. I don't know what the solution to that might be. From the south side of our neighborhood, we have the Upham's Corner Health Center, and I was a health center director for 25 years, so I love health centers. But it causes patients and staff to seek parking on the neighborhood streets. We did a parking survey. Actually, the whole time I was out there doing it, I was thinking, I wonder if the transportation department already has this. So I hear today you don't, but we do. We have measured the streets. We have counted all the parking spaces. We have counted all of the units and made an assumption of 1 car per unit, which may or may not be accurate, but probably close. We have removed all of the spaces for hydrants, intersection clearance, everything that you would normally not be able to park, handicap use, vans, all of those things. And we came up with a spreadsheet that I'm happy to share. I don't have it with me, but I can send it, that lays out what the demand is on all of the streets in our neighborhood and what the availability of parking is on all of the streets in our neighborhood. I was amazed at how many buildings, Upham's Corner is very dense, I know this, but how many residential units have no off-street parking. So there are lots of triple deckers and lots of places where people are going to have to park on the street if they have a car. They really don't have a choice. So there's always going to be a tension there. We also have 22 active businesses and we have 2 vacant storefronts. So the potential of 24 active businesses on Hancock Street. And I measured Hancock Street from Upham's Corner to Kane Square. I didn't go past Kane Square, but in that space, 24 active businesses. So we need to account for their parking needs, their staff, their patrons, their customers. They're an important part of the neighborhood too. So what we're going to be doing over the next few months is working with the transportation department to figure out what the best uses are. Residents are clamoring for resident-only parking on their side streets. On Hancock Street, there needs to be a different kind of solution. There needs to be something there for everyone. But that's something that we're going to be doing, and we look forward to working with the council, certainly with Councilor Baker's office, and with the transportation department to affect that. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Marty. Mark? Thanks, Mark.
Good afternoon. I feel like this is a very exciting hearing. My name is Mark Ibunya, and I am the co-founder of Transit Matters, and Transit Matters is lovingly based out of Raleigh, and I myself live in at Jackson Square at 225 Center Street in Councilor O'Malley's district. So I would like to echo first and foremost Eric's previous statements that, yeah, no vibrant cities that we know of have received parking problems. So I think we're here for the right reasons. And what I'm hearing is, yes, we do have a transit problem. And I would love to see each one of you at more MBTA hearings and engagement events. And surely you do have a direct line to MassDOT and the MBTA, but to show your backing and support to your residents that you believe that transit is part of this this solution, because really I think it is, and I think that especially with respect to development, that parking needs to be considered as part of the transit system, the transportation system that we have overall. I'm going to try to bottle up my comments here with respect to development, pricing, and environmental concerns and environmental justice. Because first and foremost, we do have EPA requirements about the number of parking spaces that we're allowed to have in certain districts. And we need to be sensitive to the fact that actually was tweeted just earlier this meeting, there is a very, very high tide over in the north end, and it's about to spill. It looks like it's just a few centimeters up from spilling over onto Chris Columbus Park, I believe it is over there near the Long Wharf. And that's the kind of environmental climate change that we're talking about. The reason none of these transportation solutions are working, and the reason why parking in particular is not working, is because we're not committing to anything specifically and directly and concisively. That we need to be direct and consider the fact that we do live and represent areas that are in low-lying parts of the the harbor. And that even with current projections, even with the best projections, there parts of our city will be in danger of flooding. So, and then also, what does it do for our environmental justice communities? So, yes, lower income communities already suffer from a lack of parking, but that comes hand in hand with poor transit. These neighborhoods, these working families who live in these neighborhoods, cannot rely on transit because we have not made a decision about what we're going to do with our streets. The answer is to use the street for better transit and other alternatives, because I might be a millennial who doesn't own a car, but I'm a product of a working class immigrant family who grew up in a transit-oriented neighborhood, and we've also moved to a car-oriented development suburbia, and so I know. Growing up as a teenager, you have no options in suburbia, in a place where there's no working transit. If your parents have two jobs, you're on your own to get to soccer practice or to get back home. I spent most of my high school career on Long Island, which is the prototypical suburb. But Boston should not be trying to outcompete Long Island. You do not need more parking. Your municipal lots could be better used for retail that improves walkability, and for parking, for car sharing, and for biking. I mean, the biggest thing is everybody wants Hubway in their neighborhood, but where's the funding for it? I strongly suggest that this body follow up on initiatives for transit benefit districts, partnering with these folks here to give them the tools that they need to do the things that you want. Because everybody now at this point is suffering for lack of funding for transportation investment. And some of that can be borne by development. By the burgeoning amount of development that you have in your neighborhoods and that are coming into our neighborhoods. My building the building that I live in is a product of transit-oriented development. And there's parking, and now across the street at Jackson Square Phase 3, there's an argument about whether or not we want more parking or a courtyard where people can live. Or I guess people don't live in a courtyard ideally, but that's not the argument that I want to be having with my neighbors. I don't want to be somebody who is living. I want to be your neighbor. I want to be a neighbor to my neighbors. I don't want to be the person who's saying I'm taking up parking or whatever. I'm at liberty. Actually, technically, I'm unemployed at the moment. I'm a full-time volunteer with Transit Matters. But when I do have a job, and when I did have a job, I did have the option. I did have the means to own a car. But I don't want to be competing with my neighbors for that space on the street. We need to eliminate parking minimums in developments. And I know that was a contentious issue in this discussion, but I think we should all workshop this issue. because there are a lot of other places like Seattle that have actually taken parking minimums to zero and have defined specific transit benefit districts that say, okay, you get no parking. You can't put parking here, or you can't demand more parking here, but what you're going to do is you're going to subsidize transit passes. You're going to put a hubway station. You're going to do all of these things that are going to make sure that every working family or every resident in that building is not adding pressure to the neighborhood on for residential parking. We need to, I would also suggest that, the overall issues that we're fighting for curb space, and that's dealing with curb space and dealing with off-street parking. Autonomous vehicles are on the way. What happens when those buildings with off-street parking? What do we do with all that space? Is that where all the? Are we going to continue to have this need to park cars when they're not being used with autonomous vehicles 20, 30, 40 years from now? What do we do with that? And we need to start thinking about that now as developments come in. There was a conference last Friday that T4MA and the Frontier Foundation put on, specifically talking about autonomous vehicles and innovative mobility solutions and how they are part of the solution going forward. And I would invite each one of you to review that document if you haven't already. SF Park, as in San Francisco, is one of the best market-based pricing pilots to look out. Thankfully, we are not yet at that point where we're competing with our neighbors for rents that are beyond reason as San Francisco. Let's not get there, but let's learn from the lessons that they're doing. And in particular, I want to also take a nod to, I want to make nod to the fact that we have, when we have limited parking, that spills over into on-street transit. So when so the MBTA has a requirement of Title VI to pull to the curb, and when when bus drivers can't do that because there's a truck loading on Mass Ave or something like that, that's an indication that we have a failure of our street to manage that curbside. How can we manage that better? I would suggest taking a look at what London is doing right now with Transport for London. Has done a comprehensive planning on shared loading spaces and scheduled times and off schedule delivery and I mean outside of rush hour deliveries and beyond outside of rush hour deliveries, sound mitigation. How do you mitigate sounds to deal with the resident concerns about loading out, early morning, overnight, and also to address Councillor Asabi George's concern about late night transit service and people who need to be able to get to work when the T's not working. I would love to offer them a night bus network so that they don't have to drive to their work. And I think that's important for each and every one of us to think about as we move forward. So again, thank you very much for your time, and I certainly hope that this council thinks about offering more options to their residents rather than driving forward with, so to speak, with more parking, and giving these fine city employees the tools that they need to get the job done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Does anyone else care to make a statement before I close the public testimony? Please come up and state your name and address for the record. You can just, we'll take it.
So my name's Matt Lawler. I live at 15 Basso Terrace in Rosendale. The letter is on behalf of Walk Up Rosendale, which is a community group in my neighborhood that's dedicated to making Rosendale the most walkable neighborhood in Boston. We know we've got a long way to go, but we're really working hard to get there. I would just support what Mark Tedra said, my neighbor, about the Washington Street bus corridor. I ride that every once in a while when I miss the train, my regular train, and I would say that the misallocation of resources between 20,000 bus riders and the rest of the users of that street's a problem and something we should be working on. And I would hope that happens relatively soon. I would hope that we're looking at the spring of next year for that to be happening. I think it's an obvious thing that should be happening in my neighborhood. I would also support studying a parking benefit district in Rosendale Village or Rosendale Square, depending on how you look at it. I think that's a great idea. We speak to that in the letter, and we think it would just be a great way to change the conversation about limited parking versus turning over parking more frequently and taking the revenue that we would get from that and making sort of improvements to our neighborhood that I think everyone would want to see. Finally, I would just note that on the letter, I've included a chapter from a book that the mayor actually recommended everybody read for the planning process. So that's called Walkable City. It's a book by Jeff Speck, who's actually lives in Brookline now, but is a sort of internationally known walkability sort of specialist. And his chapter is called Getting the Parking Right, I think, or Get the Parking Right. And so I actually asked him if he would agree to let me reprint the whole chapter in the letter, and so I did. I would encourage everyone to read it. Jeff's a really good writer. He summarizes information really well, takes a lot of data, a lot of research, makes it readable, makes it understandable, and really comes out with a set of points that I think we would all kind of benefit from reading and thinking about. So it's about, I think, 10 to 15 pages of reading. It goes fast. If you have a minute, make your staff read it too. It would be great. But I think that kind of conversation, that kind of thinking about walkability, parking, all these kind of issues that are related, I think will benefit the city. So thank you very much for your time, and I think maybe that's it for the hearing. Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to close the statement. Councilor Baker.
I just want to thank everybody for coming. We'll go into working session so we can kind of, I think people have a whole array of issues here, and I didn't want this to be about parking lots or just to have the discussion, look at some of those permits, if we can revisit the resident permit piece, and also that visitor permit for the nurse coming in or the nanny or whatever, those sorts of things. And John, we'll just stay in contact as the development's coming to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Council President Wu.
To our city leaders for being here with us today.
Thank you. Councilor Anissa Savi-George. Councilor Zakin. Well, thank you all for attending this hearing. I think this was a great hearing. I'm looking forward for the working session. I think that every neighborhood is a little different. So what works in Rosendale might not work for me in East Boston and the North End, but I think this is in a working session that we could sit down, and I really welcome the Livable Streets Alliance to participate, and whoever wants to participate, because we do have some good ideas. I like those ideas, and so thank you all for being here today.